I'm glad to have you back. You're still watching News Night here on Arise. News coalition of Bayelsa State governorship election to be concluded at 12 noon on Monday. According to INEC official in the Bayelsa, the process was shifted to enable outstanding results from southern Ijo and Brass local government areas to come in due to their difficult terrain. We'll cross over right now to Yenagoa, where Andy Omano is standing by. Andy. Okay, we do not have Andy yet. When we do have him, we'll get across to him. Well, we have in the studio a Rise analyst and lawyer Frank Tietie and Samson Itodo, who is the executive director, Yaga Africa. Gentlemen, glad to have you in the studio.
Thanks for having me.
The chairman of the SDP just left the studio a while ago. He was talking about the fact that your organization raised that issue of results before even the election. And so he was talking about the fact that because or based on that, the election has been compromised and that the right thing to do is for the electoral body, INEC, to cancel it. He says the security was sound. INEC has been cooperating even when it was brought to them. They said they will investigate. What do you make of that?
Well, I think the point needs to be made that the election was fraught with some measure of electoral malfeasance and irregularity, and that INEC has responded to those issues. So, in particular, the issue relating to the pre-filling of result sheets. That is unacceptable, it's condemnable, and it's a criminal offense. And like INEC noted in its message, in its statement this evening, that it's going to prosecute those who are found wanting. But the big question is, how did this actually happen in the first instance? And this particular approach adopted by political actors is the lowest of all lows. The attempt by politicians to undermine the integrity of the electoral process, because we had thought that we've gone past this very primitive way of trying to subvert the process. But it's good that INEC responded yesterday. It has suspended those elections. Again, as you know, there's one local government being expected, because based on INEC's statement, if the total number of people, from these 59 polling units, if the total number of people who collected their PVCs does not exceed the margin of lead between the two candidates, then the scheduled Saturday's election will not hold. So we need to wait. And then the returning officer needs to take into consideration all the cancellations and those polling units. But this is totally unacceptable. And INEC needs to thoroughly investigate this, because there's no way this would have happened without complicity of its officials. And I think that beyond this suspension and conduct of fresh elections, some people need to go to jail for this.
He made one statement, and that statement is that political gladiators, if I might use that word, always seem to find a way to, if you like, compromise the election. Who do we blame here? The politicians, INEC, or both? What do you think?
Well, I think those who represent INEC on the field, whether as presiding officers or even external persons that have been hired as returning officers, actually makes INEC to be vicariously liable for whatever happens there. If after all these many years, many electoral cycles that we've had, we still haven't had a foolproof, a fail-safe process against our cultural politics of often trying to circumvent the standard. And then I think it's as if we are working to fail. It's deliberate on the part of the institution. So I don't think we should make excuses here. So we have a group of desperate persons who want to capture power for all the ignoble reasons. And then we have an institution, an electoral management body that hasn't been able to deliver on its mandate of credibility to the Nigerian people. That's a big problem. But again, INEC fails more, in my opinion, when it is unable to resolve disputes. We keep talking about the judiciary being a disappointment in the way it has determined many of the issues or many of the cases that have been brought before it, forgetting, and I think I have to bring this up, forgetting that each time there is a dispute, the kind of dispute that the Social Democratic Party is raising, INEC has those powers under Section 65 of the Electoral Act to make a determination of whatever pronouncement the returning officer may have, irrespective of whatever pronouncement the returning officer may have made, concerning the declaration of any candidate as a winner. INEC has within 7 days to review whatever decision in any of those elections, whether in Bayelsa, Imo, or Kogi. But we hardly have seen INEC use those powers. INEC should make a categorical statement to say, for every dispute that has been made, for every contention, it is studying it and it is constituting a committee for the purpose of making a determination of whether or not this person has been returned as a true winner of the election.
But they have done that in this case. They said, immediately it was raised, like he said. They pursued it and said, they're investigating it. Isn't that what you
No, not at all. Not at all. For example, for anybody who has been declared winner already, shouldn't actually consider it yet to huru, because if any of the candidates is able to substantially make a case before INEC, INEC can say, wait, hold on. We have seen persons, particularly in Imo State in history, that have been declared winners, and INEC says, hold on, we are not giving you a certificate of return until we conclude our investigation. The new Electoral Act, it says that determination should be done within 7 days. So INEC should exercise its quasi-judicial powers to be able to make such determinations, irrespective of whatever the returning officer has said. So when I heard the SDP chairman said on moral grounds. No, there's nothing like morality in this kind of politics. It is on legal grounds. Elections can be cancelled in this country on the basis of if a candidate dies or if there is substantial disruption of the process in whatever way, whether it's an emergency or deliberate deliberate actions by some elements that want to be subversive. In that case, you can cancel elections. And Section 24 makes it very clear that wherever elections is cancelled as a result of the malfeasance of those persons who are participating, you do not have to declare, you do not have to have a return. You have to conclude the elections anyhow, which means if you allow elections to be, if you allow a return in the face of a cancellation or in the face of a disruption, it means that you are introducing another calculus for these political players to look at a place where they can cause mayhem and cause a disruption, and then that will not be excluded. No. All elections must be concluded. All persons that have been enfranchised must be able to exercise their franchise before you declare results. So INEC, these are the powers given to INEC that INEC is yet to exercise concerning these elections. And this power, however discretionary they are, they must be exercised. So long as there is a contention, INEC must not only investigate, but make a determination as to whether it's cancelling, as to whether it's postponing, or as to whether it's suspending the process.
Why is it, do I use the word difficult for them to do what he's saying?
Well, it's not to hold brief for INEC. It's to look at what's the position of the law. If you look at Section 65, Section 65 says it refers to declarations made by returning officers. And what is a declaration? A declaration means the results have been collated, and that particular phrase that the winner has been declared and has been returned. Only then will this 7-day period, actually kick in, because that's what Section 65 says. Now, the gap within our framework is the fact that there is no laid down procedure for how parties that have grievances with declarations can make, submissions. So one, who submits? Is it by way of a petition or is by way of a letter? Who submits that? And where should it be channeled? Like you saw in the course of the collation today, some of the party agents were submitting, petitions to the returning officer, and then he passes them on to INEC. That process there's no guidelines that regulate that process. And so it's quite fluid and it is subject to different interpretations. And until you have a guideline that clearly prescribes this procedure, is going to subject to different interpretation and it can be exploited. So there is a gap in that regard. Secondly, I don't think that, when we think about cancellations and suspension of elections, in this particular case, what INEC did was to suspend, elections in those affected polling units. Now, the statement that INEC released is not accompanied with the list of the polling units that are affected. So, for stakeholders, we do not know where are these polling units, so we cannot track the number of registered voters, the number of people who collected their PVCs in those polling units, so that stakeholders can keep an eye on this process. Because this entire process, and I tell you, with what's happening in Kogi, if after, this collation, the margin of lead is slim, such that the total number of people who collected their PVCs in those 59 polling units, if it exceeds if it's lower than the margin of lead, the returning officer is going to make a return. The only way this election will be declared inconclusive is if the margin of lead is so wide and it's so wide that it exceeds the total number of people who collected their PVCs.
So it could affect
it could substantially affect. And there's a rationale behind this. And I don't really agree with that rationale. And which is, what's the point, going to spend money to conduct elections when even if everybody who is registered in those polling units votes, it will not substantially affect the outcome of the election. That's the rationale. But then you've also deprived the people, of their rights, to vote. And this is the tension and the dilemmas that we need to deal with. But I think that what is really critical from this particular point is this application of the rules. The rule of one, the margin of lead principle, because there are certain actions taken by INEC that is prescribed in the guidelines that are made in furtherance of the provisions of the Electoral Act. That is often a tension. So things like what we have seen in this collation, we've seen things like entering zero vote, recording zero vote for a particular polling unit where there is disruption, right? Or willful disruption, because that's what the guideline actually says. But the consequence of overvoting isn't recording zero vote. It's cancellation, because the law is clear under Section 51 of the Act that where the total votes cast exceed, the
number of registered voters.
Exceeds the number of accredited voters. Overvoting has occurred, and then the presiding officer will cancel the results for that polling unit. Which means once it is cancelled, then in the course of the final collation, you also have to take into consideration, the total number of people who collected their PVCs from those polling units where elections are cancelled. That's why you enter those, you record those issues under the Form E40G. But when a polling unit result, when the presiding officers record zero for a polling unit, in a polling unit result, it is not included in the consideration of the final results
because
being declared, because it's zero. But then we've seen cases where overvoting occurs and then zero is recorded for that polling unit. And that's not what the law says. You cancel. And this is why it is important that stakeholders pay close attention to how this rule is applied, because this election is going to be won and lost based on this application of that rule.
All right. You said something, and I should ask this question. Nowhere in the world do you have a foolproof election process. I'm sure you agree. We should be aiming for maybe 80–90%. Would you then blame INEC where the political parties or political players continue to try to compromise or circumvent laid down rules and procedures of the election?
I have maintained that that is a cultural problem. It is who we are, and in our inability to practice political socialization.
It's who we
Yes, it's who we are, because when we have rules, it is the expectation is that those who play the game should play according to the rules. And so when you have a larger number of the players spending more resources on how to circumvent the standard of the game, you will constantly have this. And our kind of democracy is not homegrown enough to take into consideration our tendencies for subversion. And until we address those issues, and we dared to do so in the Babangida, Professor Humphrey wants
that's what I was going to really ask you. How do we?
Because we didn't copy it from any part of the world. Professor Humphrey also looked at the system and looked at who we are and gave all of those options to Ibrahim Babangida before they chose option A4, and it worked to a large extent, only if we had improved on it. Let me quickly add something, because this is a matter of law. The Electoral Act is here. Where the result of an election is cancelled in accordance with subsection, that is section 51 subsection 3, where the result of an election is cancelled in accordance with subsection 2, there shall be no return for the election until another poll has taken place in the affected polling unit. It's a question of law. So you can't be telling us, bringing the issues of margin, and don't encourage the issue, the idea of disrupting elections or by one form of...
No. If you say cancel in... If you cancel in a polling unit,
yes.
Will are you saying that now should affect the entire election?
Look at the law here. Where the result of an election is cancelled in accordance... Okay, let's read the whole of section 51, because my learned friend referred to it. No voter shall vote more than one candidate, or vote for more than one candidate, or record more than one vote in favor of any candidate. Now look at subsection 2. Where the number of votes cast in an election in a polling unit exceeds the number of accredited voters in that polling unit, the presiding officer shall cancel the result of the election in that polling unit. Yeah. Now, where the result of an election is cancelled in accordance with subsection 2, there shall be no return for the election until another poll has taken place in the affected polling unit. Now, it's a matter of
Can you
right.
check subsection 4?
And you're talking about poll anyway. I don't think we'll have all the time.
No, if you check subsection, because it's important to have a collective reading.
Okay, go on.
If you check
now, notwithstanding the provision of subsection 2 and 3, the Commission may, if satisfied with the result of the election, will not substantially be affected by voting in the area where the election is cancelled, direct that a return of the election be made. Understandably. But if you look at subsection section 65, what the provision of section 65 says. Now, where the decision of the returning officer shall be final in any question arising as to the dispute relating to 1, unmarked ballot paper, 2, rejected ballot paper, and then the more important one, declaration of scores of candidate and the return of a candidate. Now, provided that the Commission shall have the power within 7 days to review the declaration and return, when the Commission determines that the said declaration of return was not made voluntarily, 1, or was made contrary to the provisions of 1, the law, regulations, guidelines and manual of the election.
We'll leave it there.
Here's the point. Let's get the point. The point is simple. Nobody should say an election is concluded until after 7 days. Safely, because so long the contentions are not only with regards to return, with regards to ballot papers, whether they are marked or rejected, or whether or regards to the declaration of votes or the return of a candidate. Right. So safely, nobody should conclude an election until INEC has exercised its powers within 7 days in resolving the dispute.
We'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Samson and Tietie, my dear friend.